Hi everyone, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords, coming to you again in another video. No, this isn't a review. I am going to do a review of Raiders of Riley fairly soon. I just wanted to do a little shout out to it. Here's the Gothic Black and White Edition. It's an excellent Cthulhu-based RPG. It uses the D100 system. And it differs from Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu because it's oriented before the First World War, so at the end of the Age of Empires. And it has a much more pulpy atmosphere. And the occultism is just a tiny bit more historically authentic, you could say. I mean, it still has all the mythos creatures, all the mythos magic, and all that stuff. But it also pays more attention to kind of actual contemporary historical occult sources of the era. So there you are. And over here is Lion and Dragon, you know, as always. So what I was going to talk about today is to recap a little bit about a shitstorm that happened roughly, what, three weeks ago now, more or less. See, on Twitter, I had dared to make a post suggesting that people who are fans of these YouTube shows that are, you know, like live streams or taped streams of people playing D&D or allegedly playing D&D, but who don't actually themselves play D&D, are not really part of any kind of D&D community that I'm a part of anyway. And this caused, well, just a complete clusterfuck. I mean, everybody decided to jump on all the obviously the Critical Role fans, but all of the, you know, the SJW gang and everything else about how I was being a gatekeeper and how, you know, the community means everyone and all this sort of thing. And I thought it was very funny. I thought I should comment on that because that was a very recent controversy here. And in the end of it all, of course, as usual, being the pundit, I stick by my guns. I mean, it was great. I had more tweets and retweets and answers to my tweets and everything that I'd had probably ever, really. Like, that was the biggest thing since I ended up being on Twitter. But more importantly, I got one of the SJWs gave me the title, the RPG Pundit, the final boss of Internet Shitlords. Fantastic. So, that's all good. Now, there's still this fundamental issue. Is someone who doesn't play RPGs, who doesn't play games, is he a gamer? I would say not. You know, some other people are trying to say yes, right? Now, there might be some other D&D themed community out there that they belong to, but it has nothing in common with the D&D community, if you want to use the term community, that I belong to. And that term community is pretty problematic in and of itself, because it's really a kind of weasel word that has been invented. Because this isn't a community, this is a hobby, right? This is the RPG hobby, the D&D hobby, we can call it, you know, in the sense that D&D is just become the brand, but really we mean all tabletop role-playing games, right? And this is a hobby for people who play those games, who play them, who DM them, who collect them to a certain degree. But I mean, if you're in, you know, there's a famous term for that, the BNG, the bitter non-gamer, right? People who hang out on RPG forums and buy RPG books, but don't actually play or run the games. So, you know, this has been turned into the term community, because of course that opens up this umbrella of meaning, like, a community can be really anything. You know, a hobby means you're participating. A community means if you feel like you're part of D&D, even though you've never actually, you know, played D&D, maybe you don't own the books at all, you don't own dice, you've never had any inkling or inclination to do it, you're still part of the community because you feel like you are. It's typical postmodernist nonsense, right? So this you might be asking, well, why is this really a problem, right? Does it really matter, right? Why are you picking on these live stream shows, right? Well, I'm not really picking on them, but I want to point out that they are not, even though, first of all, I'll recognize that there's a lot of people who watch some of these shows like Critical Role, and I hate to pick on Critical Role, it's just one of the best known ones. I'm not targeting it specifically. I'm using it the way I'm using D&D for all role-playing games. I'm using Critical Role to mean all professionally produced D&D reality shows, right, which is what these are. There are a lot of people who play role-playing games and who watch these shows. There's also a lot of people who did not play role-playing games, started to watch these shows, and then started to play. Now, on that subject, I'm going to say that I am not gatekeeping to keep anyone from playing. Just the opposite. I'm saying if you want to play, if you want to come and play role-playing games, I want you here. I don't care what race you are, what color you are, what gender you think you are, what religion you are. It doesn't matter to me. I've commented several times that, just to give an example, first of all, all my gaming groups are full of Latinos, right? Some of them are darker skinned Latinos, some of them are lighter skinned Latinos. They're pretty much all Latinos, excepting one South African and a guy who's kind of Latino but thinks he's Swiss. Aside from that, though, my DCC group, for example, has people that are politically very left, politically very centrist. I have, about, at any given time, about 30% of all my active players are women. There are people of all different ages, from teens into their mid to late 40s. And, I don't care. I don't mind it doesn't matter to me who you are, because this is a hobby. All that matters to me is that you play. You come and you play. That's all you need to do. If you come and you play D&D, you are part of the D&D hobby, and I will accept you, and I will stand up for you against anyone who tries to claim that you're not, because you've played. It's that simple, right? And if you haven't played, you're not part of the hobby yet. Maybe you want to play. If you do, great, because that's another thing they accuse me of. They said, that you want to keep people from playing. No, I don't. I want them to come and play. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about people who have no interest in playing, that their interest is in something else, whether it's social justice politics or whether it's just, being fans of this ersatz sort of D&D reality shows. Now, I'm not saying all the YouTube D&D shows are frauds either, or something like that they're all scripted or invented or whatever. I don't even think Critical Role is literally scripted. What I'm saying is that there's at this point a ton of these sorts of shows, right? And some of these shows are basically just guys filming themselves playing, or girls, right? Filming themselves, or miscellaneous, filming themselves playing D&D, right? And those YouTube channels that are just that are just literally filming a game as it's happening, have very low views. There's none of them that are really popular. I mean, even when a celebrity does it, right? Like, you got Sargon of Akkad, right? He does these D&D episodes where he's playing, and he's famous for other reasons, that he has a whole lot of people watching him, and the views for him playing are quite low. And I would bet that those views of those live sessions or whatever that he does of D&D, a lot of those probably have people quitting out on the video a lot sooner than later, and that's because it's freaking boring watching other people play real D&D or real role-playing games. There's nothing really entertaining about being a spectator there. The whole fun is in the participation. Now, that's very different from these games like Critical Role or C-Team or whatever they're called, right? All of these other professionally produced ones that have professional voice actors. They have people who are in the business, so to say. They have high production values. They are pre-planned. They're not exactly scripted, but they're planned the way an improv theater is. When you go to an improv dinner theater, right, and they're telling you, we're just making it up, right? But they've made it up beforehand, right? Like, they know what they're going to say, more or less. They don't know exactly when they're going to say it. And they're all acting. They're using their acting skills Not in a way of just saying, like you might use method acting to get really into a character, but in the sense that you're playing to the camera. You are projecting your personality out there. And frankly, I don't really care. I just said it, and a lot of people are mad at me for saying something that, to me anyways, as someone who's got a very limited range of acting experience, I've done a little, but not a lot, was blatantly obvious, right? It was just so obvious. You watch any episode of Critical Role, and you can tell that those people are acting, right? And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want to watch. I mean, in reality shows, the same thing happens. They say, this is a reality show, Big Brother or whatever, and you can tell that, there a lot of these shows, the people who are hired for these shows that are pretending to be regular people are actually wannabe actors, and they're using usually really hammed up acting chops as part of their act of being a participant on this reality show. And it's exactly the same in these D&D shows. But again, it doesn't matter to me because I don't watch these shows. I don't give a damn about them, right? What I care about is the game. And so the idea that a group of people who do not play the game but do watch these shows have any kind of connection to me, that they're in any way in my community, is nonsensical. They're part of some other community. They're part of a Critical Role community, and they're welcome to be part of that. I don't care because I'm not part of it, right? But they're not part of the D&D hobby community. They're not the people who are playing D&D. You might say, well, Pundit, come on now. Why does this matter? Well, if you're asking, it's either because you've got a short memory or you're still quite young. Because sit down, kiddies, and if you're sitting comfortably, the RPG Pundit will tell you the story of a company that existed long, long before Wizards of the Coast. This company was called TSR, and they were the previous owners of D&D. And these previous owners, they had been producing D&D games quite successfully for quite some time, and they tried to branch out in a number of different ways. But it was always mainly about the games. Just like Wizards of the Coast has done other stuff. I mean, they do, D&D t-shirts, but it's never become about the t-shirts, right? Until they started doing some novels, Forgotten Realms novels that became very successful, right? Dragonlance before that, and then the Forgotten Realms. And, they created this whole market for D&D novels. And for a whole bunch of people, D&D was then about reading the novels. There's a whole bunch of people who never played D&D who read the Drizzt Do'Urden novels, right? About that freaking dark elf that's actually good and has the scimitars, right? They were terrible literature from my point of view, but, the plebs loved it. And TSR saw that there was a lot of money in it. So this is the problem with expanding the definition of community. If you expand the community of the D&D gamer hobby to include non-gamers, those non-gamers will feel that they have a right to, have a say in how the community is run. You're going to see this in, you've seen this already in video games where, for example, video game journalism was taken over effectively by a bunch of people who were journalists and activists that did not actually play any video games. Right, and they actually had active contempt for people who do play video games. I don't play video games except Candy Crush, which is probably an embarrassing thing for me to admit. But for the people that did play video games, this was a really big problem. And in comics, you saw the same thing, where gradually major comic companies were taken over by a group of people who did not really read comics. They had no knowledge of comics. They had experience mostly in young adult book writing. But they kind of infiltrated the comics hobby, and they also had active contempt for the people who were the existing comic fans, to the point that, they made, they got rid of a whole bunch of major characters from the comics, all the characters that existing comic fans really loved, replaced them with a bunch of characters that were politically motivated. They turned Captain America into a Nazi, and did all kinds of stuff that had eventually caused serious collapse of sales in the comics industry. These things have consequences. And back in the TSR days, when TSR started selling its novels, they started realizing just how much how much potential there was for money making there. And the owner of TSR back then, Lorraine Williams, she was a non-gamer. And she didn't like gamers either. She had contempt for D&D players. She famously said, D&D customers will buy what I tell them to buy, right? And she decided that the future for them was really to focus on the novels. So they began making more novels than gaming products. And then even the gaming products that they made were made in mind of the novels, right? They were affected by the novels. They were for people who read the novels to buy these books, not to play the books, but to have them as source books, right? So they became full of not actual meaningful setting lore, but setting fluff, right? The sort of stuff that didn't matter for gaming, but that mattered a lot if you were a big fan of the books, right? Of reading the novels. So it changed the tone of the books, and people who were actual gamers stopped buying it. The big problem with this whole novel thing is that it was a bubble. I won't say a fad exactly, because there are still people who read these terrible, terrible novels, but they were for a moment much more popular than they would eventually be. And when that bubble burst, TSR went bankrupt. And when they went bankrupt, they had a warehouse full of returned novels that they couldn't afford to pay the returns on, right? And because these books were no longer selling. So this is the problem, is the influence that non-gamers will end up having over the gaming hobby, and that the companies, in their greed, will look to service, not just their greed, but also these days their sense of virtue signaling, right? Because they always put these things in the trappings of kind of what's popular among the leftist set, right? So you'll be suggesting, just like it was suggested to me, when I said only people who game should be considered gamers, they said, well, you're homophobic then. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean? You know, I didn't say anything about people who are gay shouldn't be gamers. I didn't say anything that people of color shouldn't be gamers. I just said to be a gamer, you have to actually game. But instantly you get these SJW attack words that come out there, right? You're a gatekeeper. You're intolerant, right? If gatekeeper means that you think that people who don't game shouldn't be called gamers, shouldn't be the ones who are in charge of the gaming hobby, then you've just turned, the term gatekeeping into something so meaningless. You've turned the definition also of D&D community into something meaningless, because then at what point does this stop, right? Do people just vaguely peripherally involved with D&D in some vague way get to be part of the community, right? It's all nonsense. So I guess I've ranted enough about this right now. Tell me what you think, if you like, in the comments. Tell me what you thought of the video. I'm currently considering making more of these videos or not. I think if I'm going to be doing this in a serious way, I'll have to figure out how to monetize it, which would probably not be with YouTube, because I'm guessing that YouTube would demonetize me pretty quickly. If you have any advice on this, please feel free to share it. And I might also be working, it's coming up on, it's in the planning stages, some kind of a D&D themed show, which I guarantee will not be us playing on the show. It won't be anything about that. It'll be more like, like a talk show where we're going to talk with, I'll probably have a co-host and we'll probably have guests about what's in the news, what's controversial in the D&D hobby. I'll leave you with this notion, right? We see a shift that's happening now in the hobby that had been pushed back. It had been resisted to a certain extent because of efforts of me and people like me for the last several years that have kind of kept in check the D&D hobby from being completely dominated, and also because of the independence of parts of the D&D hobby, like the OSR, that are basically immune, or mostly immune, almost immune, to being controlled in this way by the what I like to call the pseudo-activist left, right? The totalitarian left. But I think we see that it is coming here. And so, there was a Gamergate and a Comicsgate. I'm thinking we might preemptively want to have a D&D gate so that we can kind of deal with this before it becomes a big problem, and not after, like what happened with the comics industry, where Only now, after the comics industry has had 2 years of nightmare, are people doing anything about it. So, give that a thought. That's the RPG Pundit signing out. Currently smoking Lorenzetti Poker with H&H Chestnut. Take care.